Class is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey, good morning. This is Dave Fleer, and welcome to the session entitled The Cost of Perfectionism, sponsored by Insight Enterprises and Sherpa. The chat and Q&A functions are open, and we invite you to share your thoughts with one another throughout the presentation. And if you pose the question, we'll have a moderator will ask those questions at the end. Our speaker, Ebony Burrows, has spent most of her 20-year career in the roles of information technology in various functions and roles. For the last 7 years, she's dedicated her career to growing as an experienced agilist. That's a great term. Coaching teams and organizations as they implement the agile concepts and practices, and shifting to people-centric workplace cultures. Her experiences have been applied in various industries, including finance, utilities, insurance, retail, engineering, and communications. Ebony has a talent for connecting theory to practice. Wow, that's a good concept. With a mindset that small changes make sizable impacts. Her work in diversity, equity, and inclusion directly impacts her agile coaching style. Ebony is forever learning, finding ways to combine her interests in various subject matters, including psychology, philosophy, instructional design, and applying that to her approach to training, coaching, and mentorship. Ebony currently serves as a co-chair of the Afro Professional and Allies at Insight and has led sessions for the Charlotte Chamber, the Women in Agile, PMI Metrolina, and various engagements sponsored by the local community groups dedicated to Black professionals and other underrepresented groups and help them grow and navigate in the tech space. Ebony is a graduate of North Carolina Agriculture and Technical State University, A&T, where she obtained a bachelor's degree in graphic communication systems and a master's in information technology. She holds several certifications from Six Sigma, Scrum Alliance, Scrum.org, Scaled Agile Framework, ICI Agile, Procity Change Management, and Lean Change Management. So that's a lot. That's a lot of work. So please help me welcome Ebony, and you're going to make her the presenter now, correct?
There we go.
Great, thank you, David. I'm gonna share my screen here. All right, David, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see my presentation?
Yep.
Okay, cool, thank you. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining this particular talk. There's a siren going by. Hope you can't hear it. I'll go ahead and move forward. First of all, David, thank you so much for the introduction. You made me sound like a really important person. Let's go ahead and get started. So this is the cost of perfectionism, the agile mindset over the pursuit of perfection. So just a little bit more about me. I do work as a senior agile coach at Insight. I work out of the Charlotte office, and in the Charlotte office, we are a bit obsessed with Bitmoji. So this is mine. Yes, that is a sandwich on my t-shirt. Sometimes it's a taco, but that's pretty much what I'm into. Make sure my food is on my shirt. I am very passionate about creating inclusive cultures. I love to laugh. I love to eat. I love the art of storytelling. I listen to lots of podcasts, and I would probably say 50 or 60% of the podcasts I listen to are comedians, because comedians are just fantastic when it comes to being able to tell great stories. I use a lot of what I hear in these comedic podcasts in the way that I present and the way that I facilitate workshops, and you may get a little bit of my comedic chops here today. I also read a lot of different articles and books, and my favorite author is Stephen King. So yes, I'm a little dark, but Stephen King also has a great talent for telling really interesting stories. So that's a little bit about me. Moving forward, I want to just define a bit what we mean by perfectionism. So perfectionism is a disposition to regard anything short of perfection as unacceptable. And there are three types of perfectionism I'm going to highlight for you today. The first one being social. And if you are someone who exudes social perfectionism, then you tend to be self-critical. You probably put a lot of pressure on yourself. And you might do that because you are concerned about being rejected from other people. So you hold yourself to very high standards, and sometimes those standards can be harmful. The third type of perfectionist characteristics is other oriented. So that means that you exude that perfectionism characteristics onto other people. You hold other people to high standards, and that could result in being extremely critical. It can also make it very difficult for you to develop good working relationships with other people. And so for those of you who are familiar with concepts of Agile, who worked on Agile teams, you know, it's really important to be able to work with other people, to collaborate, and being highly critical or having this type of perfectionist characteristic is really going to be an anti-behavior when it comes to working in such a collaborative space. The third type of perfectionism is self-oriented. So that means you're really organized, you're highly conscientious, and you have high standards, but those high standards are achieved through your ability to adapt. So someone who is self-oriented really is probably the most balanced of anyone who sees themselves on any spectrum of perfectionism. You want to succeed. Quality is a major driver for you, but you also understand that even though high quality is your driver, perfection is often short. So you balance being able to respond to change, being able to learn as you go, and that really creates just a healthy way of shooting for high quality without putting too much pressure on yourself or others to be perfect. So here's a quick interactive slide here. So now that I've talked a little bit about these different types of perfectionism, what I'd like everybody to do is to go into menti.com. You could take a screenshot of this QWERTY screen or QR code, but go into menti.com, enter 15, 6, 9, 2, 6, and 1. And what I'd like you to do is to start to just think about, and I'll put these back up here, these definitions of perfectionism, these different characteristics. I want you to see, based on the descriptions of different types of perfectionists, whether or not you see yourselves in any of those three types. So let me drag this screen over so we can see the definitions. And as you go into menti.com, those definitions will pop up for you as well. So what type of perfectionist are you? If you relate to any of these, you know, are you self-oriented? Are you social? Are you other-oriented based on those definitions? So we've got a few responses coming in. I'll give everybody a couple of minutes. And when you go into menti.com, those definitions will pop up on your screen. But here we're just looking at the results. All right, so far, most people are saying they feel like they're pretty balanced. They're self-oriented, okay? All right, any other responses here? Just give everyone another minute. There are 26 people in the audience, and so far 4 responses have come in. So I just want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to go to menti.com, put in that code, and just drop in where you think you fall on the perfectionist scale.
Ebony, can you move your screen over a little bit? Someone said they can't see the left side of your screen.
This is how the presentation shows up. If you go to menti.com, the descriptions of the perfectionist will come up. Actually, let me do this. Let me slide this out of the way. And I will just go back to the previous screen. Yeah, so hopefully that'll help. I'll drag back over the results once we have a few more coming in. And again, that code for menti.com is 1569261. And while people are thinking about this, there's no shame in identifying yourself as social, other oriented, self oriented. And that could fluctuate too. And I know for myself, I tend to be, I have a tendency to be other oriented sometimes. It really just depends on the day. And, I think for the most part, I'm probably self oriented, but depending on the type of pressure that I'm under, I might put pressure on other people, on my teammates, to shoot for a non sustainable goal of perfection. But I try to be aware of that because relationships are important with my teammates. And they're important for me and for all of us to reach the value and the quality of work that we're trying to get to. So I think the true takeaway from this is wherever you find yourself on the spectrum of things, just being aware of when you're exuding certain characteristics. Do you ever feel like you have times where you're just, you feel like you're never really able to get things done, or you're never really able to satisfy, or you feel hard on yourself. I gave this talk last week to a group of college students, and one thing that came out, which was really different. I think the audiences, depending on the audience I'm talking to, the results tend to really vary. So I was talking to a group of college students last week, and what we noticed was most of them saw themselves as socially or social perfectionists, where they put a lot of pressure on themselves. These students this was a brunch that was specifically for Black women in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So being a minority, feeling like I have to work extra hard in order to be seen as someone who produces equal value, or be seen as someone who has a certain level of expertise, that could make us put a lot of personal pressure on ourselves. But here, I think this audience is probably full of more working professionals. And it's quite possible that maybe we figured out how to find balance in that, to have high standards for the work that we do, to be adaptive, because, we kind of have to be, things are changing all the time. And to just be aware of when we're putting too much pressure on ourselves or too much pressure on others. So if you've submitted your results, you probably see that the majority of people who finish this survey say that they're self-oriented. That's not surprising for the audience that we have. Okay, going to go ahead and move us forward. Past the mentee. All right, so I am an Agilist. I am an Agile coach. So of course, I will have to remind you about Agile values and principles. So there are 4 Agile values: individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working with software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. There are also 12 principles of Agile. So for many of you, you've probably seen the values and these principles before. Some of you, this might be brand new. What I like to highlight here is when we think about these different types, these primarily those first two types of perfectionism, social perfectionism and other oriented perfectionism. Think about the impact on these values from an agile perspective. If you're someone who puts a lot of pressure on yourself, if you're someone who puts a lot of perfection pressure on other people, think about how that might impact your ability to have good interactions with other people that you work with. And think about if, those perfectionist characteristics, if your interactions are challenging, then how does that impact the work that you're trying to produce? The ability for the team to work together. I think I spoke about that earlier. Then, of course, from a values perspective, customer collaboration. I can definitely speak for myself when I was doing more work on the technical side of things. I had I really put a lot of pressure on my non-technical stakeholders. Why don't they understand what we're trying to tell them? Why don't they understand the complexity of the work that's being asked for? When we ask for information a certain way, why is it so hard to do it in the way that we ask for? So that put a lot of pressure on my stakeholders, and it made my relationship with my non-technical stakeholder partners very challenging. Our ability to respond to change. If perfectionism is your goal, then what happens if something in your environment changes? So that this idea of what was perfect, that idea now needs to shift so that you can be responsive to the changing environment around you, whether that's changing requirements or changing priorities or just people who have changed within the group that you're working with. When we think about these 12 principles, if perfection, either perfection from yourself or perfection for others or perfection in just what it is that you're building or producing from a project perspective, how does that impact some of these principles that we see here on the screen? So, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I always have to count these. So, principle number 8, which is right in the middle, aim for sustainable progress. If perfection is the goal, then how can you identify when you've hit a pace where you can be that can be forecasted, where you can be counted on, you and your team can be counted on to produce a certain amount of value over time? If you're always looking at perfection, then you're always trying to go up, up, up. You're always trying to deliver more, deliver more, deliver more. But as we see, responding to change from a value perspective is a part of the concepts of agile. So as change occurs, then your value production may fluctuate over time. So just kind of keep those things in mind as we talk today. Thinking about perfectionism and the goal of perfection, how does that impact your team's ability to work well together? So this might be, some of you may be really familiar with the 5 dysfunctions of a team. This is a book published by Peter Lencioni. The 5 dysfunctions are absence of trust, fear of conflict, lack of commitment, avoidance of accountability, and inattention to results. So when we think about shooting for perfection, how does that impact dysfunctions on a team of people working together? If I'm a perfectionist and I'm looking for everything to be perfect, does that impact positively or negatively the ability for my teammates to trust me? Because again, if we think about needing to be responsive, will my teammates trust my ability to shift and be nimble when change occurs in our environment? Does being a perfectionist breed conflict within my group? Does it make people less or more committed to the work? Do we avoid accountability, or do we step into accountability when we operate as perfectionists in a team environment? And I think the big thing here for me as I was doing the research for this talk was the impact of the results when we're shooting for perfection. I think the assumption is when perfection is the goal, then quality is the outcome. And what I realize is that's not necessarily true. Because again, perfection is kind of based on an initial plan of action. It's based on your initial understanding of what your outcomes or your outputs are supposed to be. But when change occurs, you have to be able to adjust your plan, adjust how you implement, adjust how you work together. So value is always the goal. Value, satisfying your customer, producing value, progress towards value. But if you're shooting for that initial idea of what is perfect, your initial understanding of what is perfect, then you tend to kind of make decisions based off of that versus the new information that you get in to satisfy your customer and to produce value. So here's the thing. Progress isn't perfect. When we think about progress, and this might be familiar for anyone that's worked on an agile team, especially Scrum, this looks like your typical velocity chart. And in the agile world, I think when we talk about Scrum and we talk about velocity metrics, we usually use this example as what velocity will look like. But if you've ever had to report on velocity, if you've ever had conversations with teams about their ability to produce value over time, the reality is it looks a lot like this. So, but that doesn't mean that the team or you as an individual, it doesn't mean that you're not making progress. It just means that your progress day to day, week to week is going to fluctuate. And that's because whatever we plan to do was based on a certain understanding of what was available to us, time, resources, money. And as those things tend to shift, then our ability to produce value or that same level or more value is impacted. Anytime you introduce a certain amount of change into an environment, the productivity will suffer for it. It might suffer a lot. It might suffer a little bit. So here, I just want you to kind of understand that the unrealistic expectation of constantly improving at this pace, like that never happens. I haven't seen, I've been working in the world of IT specifically for almost 25 years. And in my history and the teams that I've worked with, this is the best of teams. Their velocity, their ability to be productive, it's never this stable. There's always something going on that makes their ability to their productivity and what they produce, it's always going to vary a bit. But that's okay. When we think about velocity, productivity, what we're shooting for is sustainable pace. So what we're looking for is the average, right? So if you're a project manager and you're tasked with being able to, of course, you're tasked with being able to report statuses, to forecast on how much work a team is going to be able to produce over time. The velocity or this kind of week to week or day to day productivity, that's not what you're paying attention to. What you're paying attention to is the average amount of productivity or value that that team produces. Sustainable pace is going to give you the best information in terms of helping your stakeholders understand what they can expect out of a team. It's also important that when we're shooting for perfection, it could breed analysis paralysis. So I'll give you a real easy example. If you, and I'm using this example because I am guilty of this too. If you've ever been trying to write an email to someone and it takes you 3 hours to send a very simple email because you're constantly rereading and did I use the right words? Is this the right cadence? Is this the right tone? Nothing is ever perfect. Shoot for intent. Make sure that whenever you're communicating, whether it's to someone over email, whether it's with your team, intent is always really important. Tone is also important as well. But it's never going to be perfect. So is it more important that the email or the messaging is perfect? And if you're spending that time trying to figure those things out, how much time are you losing focusing on the perfection of this conversation in this email? It's the same thing when we're in software development or we're working on our projects. Part of the reason why Agile exists is because in previous, if you've ever served as a business analyst, I know I have, but in previous times, and I'm thinking, 15 years ago or so, when we were developing requirements, we spent so much time just documenting requirements and going back through this workflow of sign-offs and is this right and is this language correct? Agile comes along, and Agile really introduces the concept of backlogs, story items that are in plain English and that they're negotiable, and that basically the team needs to be able to move forward based on what we understand to be true, based on our understanding of intent. And that doesn't mean we have everything figured out on day one. It means that as of today or as of this particular time box, this is what we all agree to be true and our understanding of that truth to be. We're going to move forward in a short amount of time. And if change comes in, we haven't gone too far down the rabbit hole to be able to make modifications to those requirements or those criteria. And then to reevaluate what our new understanding of the intent of the work or the value is supposed to be. So a couple of things here. I think I lost mine. Up there it is. Speed isn't the goal. Being a perfectionist or operating from a perfectionist standpoint may have a tendency to focus on not just the highest of quality, and of course, quality is super important, but not just perfect, but fast. And when we're thinking about producing value over time, we're thinking it's really important to think about the progress that we're making towards that value that we're trying to produce. So this is where understanding milestones come in. Agile is not antithetical to setting milestones. Even if your team is that you're working with is not a scrum team, if they're not working in sprints, and sprints are really helpful to putting milestones in place. But even if your team really isn't working in that type of structure, milestones are really helpful for teams to kind of back in to the outcome that they're trying to get to. So if you're working with a team and you've got a milestone every 4 weeks, from a PM perspective, you can always look at your metrics. You can always have a conversation with your team about, are we making good progress towards this goal that we've set? And have your team work with you to help set good milestones. Again, we don't want to just pull dates out of the air. We want to put in dates that make sense. So you may take a quick swath of a milestone, but because we're working in the world of Agile, we're constantly reflecting on whether or not that initial milestone or that initial roadmap that we put in place, does that still make sense based on the data that we're generating? This is where being able to inspect and adapt comes from. So connecting with the people who are doing the work, and this is an individual thing as well. I have a personal Kanban board. You can't see it, it's on this side of the screen, but I have a personal Kanban board. I set up things to say, I plan this week to get 4 of my items on my Kanban board done this week, but I have to check in with myself to see if what I thought, the time that I thought I would have to get those things done, does that still ring true? Because maybe I need to modify my work in progress, and that's okay. So if you're inspecting, if you're looking back at what you've produced in the past, then that can set you up for setting really good forecasts and communicating to your stakeholders about the reality of what they can expect going forward. You want to be able to prioritize to avoid overcommitting. This is really hard for us in business and a lot of us personally. There's so many things we want to be involved in. There's so many things we feel like we have to be involved in. But I want you to keep in mind, no is a very powerful word. So if we think about that socially prescribed perfectionism that we talk about, putting that perfectionist pressure on ourselves, we got to live in reality. We might want to be involved in everything. We may feel like we need to be involved in everything for things to get done. But my advice, check yourself. You're not the most important person in the world. The work will get done. Engage where you feel like you have the capacity to do so. This is also good feedback and a good lesson for your teams. but realize that you individually are not the center of everything. So putting the pressure of being involved in everything is really unrealistic. You have to trust that you have to trust your team, and that comes back to having really good relationships with people. You have to trust that if you are not engaged, you have to trust that the people who are usually highly skilled will figure out how to get things done when you are not directly engaged all the time. And then lastly, you want to avoid operating in chaos. And this is really important, or operating on the edge of chaos. There's a difference between being able to react versus being able to respond. Reacting means that everything that comes at you or comes at your team is always urgent. It's always on fire. And if that's what's going on in your environment, you got bigger things that you need to address. You and your organization need to address. Being able to respond means that you have policies in place that identify things that are highly critical versus things that are important. Everything doesn't have the same level of importance. And so if you are able to prioritize, if you're able to have those policies in place individually and as a team and within your organization, if you have mechanisms in place that help you understand the things that have highest value, things that are urgent, critical, versus things that are important, then you're usually able to be more responsive than reactive. And it doesn't mean that reaction isn't a part of your work life. Like, that happens. Something gets on fire. I got to jump off this call. We had a deployment that failed. Whatever the situation is, being able to react is really important, especially from a professional standpoint. But you don't want to be in a situation where every day you're constantly reacting to all things. Context switching, that becomes a big challenge there. So you need to be able to kind of have those policies in place, have that instinct of, does this require my immediate attention or my team's immediate attention, or is this something that we can wait to address tomorrow or later in the day? So one thing I really love is design thinking. And if you've ever worked with a UX designer or someone who's a member of a UX team, then you've probably heard of this concept of design thinking. But if you haven't, design thinking is an iterative process in which you seek to understand your users, challenge assumptions, redefine problems, and create innovative solutions which you can prototype and test. So from a user experience standpoint, this is a specific way that the user experience professionals use to identify and solve problems for customers and consumers. The overall goal of design thinking is to identify alternative strategies and solutions that are not instantly apparent with your initial level of understanding. Now, I'm going to connect the dots for you. Design thinking is really helpful when you're trying to avoid concentrating on perfection, and I'll tell you why. First, design thinking really helps you prioritize your customer or your user. It takes the focus off of you, and it puts the focus on the people who are consuming the product or the features or the solution that you and your team are working to build and release. If you are not answering questions as yourself, but you're thinking about the experience that your user or your consumer might be having, it makes it really difficult for you to focus on perfection from your perspective. Instead, you're focusing on the humanity of the work. You're focusing on the experience of the people who are going to, who are going to be using this product. And it really helps you produce something that is important and valuable to that particular group. Design thinking is a collective and collaborative way of working. When you're sharing ideas, when you're sharing progress and getting feedback to help, it really does help you build upon your existing knowledge and understanding of things. And this means that you're able to address gaps as they come up. When you are focusing on perfection, which is a very kind of internal way of determining what's good, you don't really seek the input of others. And so this design thinking approach, and it doesn't mean that working individually isn't important, because that's going to happen, right? But it really is important to be someone, and again, this kind of goes back to our 4 Agile values. It really is important to be someone who focuses on collaborative working so that together you can identify gaps that you yourself may not perceive. It also helps you unlock hidden capabilities. So the empathy factor of design thinking allows you permission to let go of those preconceived limitations that you may put on yourself or that you may put on others. It opens up ideas for innovation and to truly experiment through curiosity. And so it really just sheds the sphere of perfectionism. Let's try something. Let's see what happens. And then everybody becomes a part of that process. So this is my last slide. Hopefully you've gotten a little bit about how perfectionism impacts you and your teams. And now that you don't have to be perfect, you can just be good. You may or may not be familiar with this quote. This is from John Steinbeck, who wrote The Grapes of Wrath in 1939. And John Steinbeck is a Nobel, I think he won the Nobel Peace Prize, and he definitely won the Pulitzer Prize. But I thought this quote was really poignant, because if you can stop focusing on perfect, or if you can stop putting your own ideas of perfectionism on others, then good is where you get to. And that is it. Are there any questions from the audience?
Well, Ebony, that was kind of breathtaking. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You do have a shout out from Jessica Workman. She wanted to say hello.
Oh, hi, Jess.
And then another question is, they say perfect is the evil of good. What are your thoughts on that?
I would agree. Again, when we think about what's perfect, it's our internal understanding of what's good. It's very, at least for me, and this is just my own kind of definition of perfection. Focusing on perfection can be a very selfish way to look at the world, because it doesn't really take into consideration the experience of other people. It's very much internal. And so the work that we do, especially in IT, is usually work of service. So when we're and even as an Agile coach, we are leaders within our organizations, within our teams. As project managers, you are leaders, but you are leaders who serve. And so if you are putting your perfectionist ideas on others, especially, then you're not really taking in consideration what the challenges are that others may have to work through, and being able to help them adapt through those challenges. And you can only imagine if perfectionism is something that you're constantly putting on yourself, standards that can be hard to reach, and internally maybe punishing yourself for coming up short, or standards that are just not sustainable. It really makes it hard for you to do your best work. And also, being perfect is inauthentic, because the fact is none of us are perfect. So if you can show up as a more authentic version of yourself, it really does allow you to do your best work and to show up and help others do their best work as well.
Nice. I'm going to read a couple of comments. I think it's the only way to remain sane when not everyone has the same level of expectations, self or other. That's from our PMI Metrolina president, Rhonda. And then Neelan, he's like, and as an Agile coach, has it been difficult to effect this level of change at the enterprise level?
I think it can be difficult when you're working with leaders of an organization, at least to start. So I'll just kind of talk about my own personal experience. Starting out, it can be difficult to help leaders understand that, well, the truth of the matter is they understand that perfectionism or shooting for perfection doesn't really make sense, but they're responding to like antiquated measurements, right? Or antiquated approaches to doing work. And so as an agile coach, when we show up in the organization and say, no, we want to measure, we measure your ability to be responsive. We measure value. We're not measuring perfection. All we're doing is giving them permission to operate in a way that they knew they needed to operate in the first place. So a lot of this stuff really isn't new to us as individuals. It's not always new to our leadership, but it really does open the door and give people permission to say, okay, progress is really what's important. And we may take many milestones. It may take many iterations. It may take many versions of product development, but progress towards value and how quickly we move through that progress is what's really important. So I hope that answers the question.
Nice. I just want to go back to the beginning a little bit for me. So I may have missed this, but can you be social and self-oriented? Because I find myself being both. I used to be a perfectionist like crazy. I mean, I realized I had to downsize it. But is that a case where you can be both?
Yeah, absolutely. You can be social and other oriented. You can be combinations of all of these different characteristics. And I think we have to remember that a lot of times, depending on where we fall on the spectrum, it's because we're responding to something in our environment, right? And some of us are just kind of naturally hard on ourselves. And maybe it's because we're responding to what we've been taught as children. Maybe we're responding to what we think people think about us. So that's socially, that social orientation. It really is, I'm hard on myself because I want to be accepted by others. That's really kind of where that comes from. So we're really responding to what we think other people think about us when we're other oriented. And some of that can also be a response to what we think other people are, what we perceive other people are thinking. When we put pressure on other people to be perfect, we may see that as a reflection on ourselves, especially if we're leading teams. If the team isn't perfect, what does that say about me as a leader? But definitely being self-oriented, that kind of like sweet spot, yeah, you can totally be a combination of those things. It really just depends on, I think it depends on the day, and it depends on the stimulus that you're getting.
Yeah. Okay. Ebony, you did get a lot of good comments for the information, very good information they stated. So I'm going to turn this over to David and let him close this out.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for attending. That was great, Ebony. I mean, I run out of time every day, and prioritizing and accepting good enough, is an important concept. And I really appreciate your presentation. Thanks everyone for attending, and the standard how you self-report and get your PDUs. If you attended the session, it'll happen automatically. If you're watching this later, you'll want to go through this process and use that code there. We're not going to go on a break. I want to make sure that everyone understands that how the interactive sponsor booths work, and that you can take a few minutes to go see Insight. It's a great company. I I checked them out myself this morning again, and it's quite an organization. Of course, Ebony is a great leader there, and then Sherpa, they also have a virtual booth, and you can never know enough people, and those are good folks to know. So go by their booths and say hello. Our next speech or presentation will be at 12:20, so we're on break until then. Thank you very much. You can go ahead and end the session.
Thank you.
Thank you all.